Okay. We have made it out of the neutral zone. Maybe. We'll see. And we're on to the new beginnings. How do we know that the new beginning is taking root? Well, there are some signs. New skills are being built, and early wins are occurring. They may be small, but it's still important to acknowledge them. Energy is picking up, right? Remember when we had to reduce our kind of goals for productivity because nobody was in a great place to achieve or overachieve? Well, now energy is picking up. And there is a renewed commitment. There is a renewed commitment to the change. There is a renewed commitment to that, to doing something to make sure the change happens the way it was designed, the way it was intended, and adds value to the business. Okay, so people are not machines, so we don't always operate linearly. And beginnings reactivate some old fears that were originally triggered by the ending. So, for example, beginnings mean that the ending was real and that the losses that were sustained actually are lost, like for good, not coming back. We can't retrieve them. We can't go back to the past. That can be unsettling to some people. And new ways of doing things are always a gamble. It's always risky. If we're doing something that we've never attempted to before, then failure is very likely. And nobody wants to fail, no matter how much we talk about failure being part of success and you learn from failure and you do better next time. Yes, but it still does not feel good to fail. So that is why sometimes it seems like we made it out of the neutral zone, but then we find ourselves back in it, or even back in the endings zone. Okay, the 4 Ps. So the 4 Ps are there to help us make sure that the new beginning sticks, and to help those of us who have influence over others within an organization, whether formal or not, does not matter, help them also contribute to the successful change initiative. So the first one you can ask for if you're an individual contributor, or provide if you are in a position to do so, clarity around the basic purpose behind the outcome expected by leadership. That's because people have to understand the logic of it before they can turn their minds to work on it. Why are we doing this? So when an M said, keep communicating about how the change adds value to the business, that speaks directly to the first P. Why are we doing this? What's the point? What's the purpose? A lot of leaders think, well, I've said it once, when we were announcing the change, like, can they remember why we're doing it? No, you cannot over communicate something like that. Like, say it again, say it differently, like, keep saying it, like, send a memo, like, you really cannot over communicate it. And then a picture of how an outcome should look and feel. Some people are very visual, and they kind of they drift off if someone describes a purpose in a wordy kind of way. But if somebody describes it in a way that lets them picture it very vividly, then they can get on board with it. There's also a plan for phasing in the outcome. And if you're someone like me a plan with who is going to do what by when. It's like a security blanket, because even though I know it could all change, still having something in writing, something concrete about how things are going to happen is very assuring to me and others who are wired similar to how I'm wired. And a part to play in both the plan and outcome itself. So some people are going to be given a part to play, and some are going to like it, and others are not going to like it so much. And others are not going to be so clear what their part is. And here comes the fun part. Depending on your organizational sort of structure and climate, you may be able to propose one for yourself that is actually in line with what you're good at and perhaps what you'd like to learn next and where you'd like to go next. And at least it will be a starting point for your supervisor or whoever you're bringing this to think about your role and how it should evolve, even if it's not going to end up exactly how you're proposing it. But taking initiative in this case is always way, way better than sitting back and feeling like you're not of much use to the organization and kind of wasting your potential. Reinforcing a new beginning for others. So this is mostly for those in the positions of formal authority, although it doesn't always have to be. So being consistent in your message and walking your talk. So if the guideline or the rule is that during team meetings we're all on camera, then you have to be on camera as a team lead or a project lead or whatever your role is. Ensuring quick successes and celebrating them. Again, during this new beginning phase, no success is too small to celebrate. So look for opportunities to highlight good work that's happening. And symbolize the new identity. Again, it can be digital or not. For remote teams or partially remote teams, it's probably better that it be digital. But again, like a team logo or a tagline, I mentioned those before, or a photo or some other way that identifies the new team and makes it real. Ambiguity calls for adaptive approach. What does this mean? Well, I wanted to share this because I really like this model of technical problems of adaptive challenges that's based on work of Ron Heifetz and Bob Keegan, both of Harvard. And I had an opportunity to study with Bob Keegan, and I'm subcontracting for him now. And this model helps to understand why certain things are more difficult than they should be, why making certain behavioral changes are more difficult than they should be. So, technical problems, let's step through those. When we are encountering a technical problem, a solution is known and it is supported by existing mindset, structures, and procedures. And creating and implementing solutions requires informational learning. So an example of that would be if we're migrating from one database system to another. The solution is known, like we know how this works. And there's even a process for overseeing conversion from one system to another that's been proven. It's been done a number of times. It doesn't mean that you won't have to do workarounds and creative problem solving, but more or less it is set. And creating and implementing the solution to a technical problem requires informational learning. So what is informational learning? This is one of my kids' toys. and it's going to represent a mindset. So when we've got informational learning going on, then pieces of informational learning like knowledge, expertise, skills, experience, practice, they're gonna go into the mindset just as it is. The mindset is not gonna have to change in any way to accommodate that technical informational learning that's needed to solve a technical problem. Now, contrast that with adaptive challenge. An adaptive challenge is when the solution is not known, and it requires overhauling existing mindset, priorities and beliefs and behaviors and loyalties and identities and assumptions, and the list goes on. And defining, creating, and implementing solution requires transformational learning. So an adaptive challenge is when things change within an organization and we no longer know what our role is and how we can be helpful to organization and how we can make best use of our skills and talents. We don't want to be working on something that's no longer useful because we know like an old way is going away. So there is no known solutions. We're figuring it out on the go, hence ambiguity and all the unknowns that we've been talking about. And the need to do it differently because no one is going to hand us a blueprint for like, this is how you should be conducting yourself given these changes. Maybe towards the end of it, but there's probably going to be like some version of a neutral zone period where things are pretty much up in the air. And so transformational learning, if we go back to this representation of a mindset, components of transformational learning, those revised priorities and re-examined beliefs and new behaviors and changed loyalties and different identities, perhaps, at least professional identities, and assumptions that we no longer take as absolute truths. So in order for them to go in, the very mindset has to adjust. The mindset has to expand so that those components of transformational learning that are the answer to adaptive challenge can go in and stay in. What Heifetz calls classic managerial mistake is when we take an adaptive challenge and mistake it for technical problem. And we throw all sorts of technical solutions at what is a problem of the mind, the adaptive challenge. Now, a lot of challenges these days are of mixed nature. They've got technical problem aspect, they've got the adaptive challenge aspect, and it makes them interesting and complex. And it is so important to address both aspects, the technical and the adaptive, to really get at the challenge. What happens a lot, again, is that the technical aspect is attended to, but the change initiative is not successful overall, or is not successful for long, because the adaptive challenge has not been recognized and has not been taken care of. And this is a big concept, this is a big idea, and I'm happy to come back to it in a third hour. And now I want to introduce another big, do I? Huh. Or do I save this for the third hour? Because this is so juicy. I don't want to just skim it. This is how we develop our mental complexity and stages of adult development. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through the rest of the slides in a session, and then I'll come back to this. So I invite you to do the very last exercise in your worksheet. And this is something that actually helps to build mental complexity, which helps with navigating adaptive challenges. And it just helps to develop that perspective that witnesses our experience in a way that helps us actually see our growth and where we're still stuck. So in your worksheet, or just on a sheet of paper, you can complete 2 statements. One is, I used to think before the session, like some kind of idea that you had before the session. And now I think, like something that shifted for you during the course of the last almost 2 hours. I used to think, and now I think. I used to think I was at the mercy of my employer, and now I think I can do some things about my situation. It's like an oversimplified example. So I'm going to give you a minute or so to do this, and as always, I invite you to put your responses in the chat where others are able to see and benefit from them. Okay. Thank you for doing this exercise. And here are some resources that are available for you if you want to explore what we talked about further. The book by William Bridges, another talk by William Bridges, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, and a couple of other resources. The ones that are underlined are available through O'Reilly Safari. And this is my information. I invite you to follow me on LinkedIn if you would like. And I see something came in from OP. I used to think that I'm not very good with change. This perception of myself was suspicious, as I'm also get easily bored when things don't change for too long. Now I think that change is hard for many people, and you need to take time and have intent to go through the process. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. This is great because it kind of highlights that we experience change differently. Some of us have this love-hate relationship with change, but intention and not rushing through it for sure helps. So thank you, OP. I'm going to go back to the slide that I skipped over. I'm going to go through the slide and then go right into that extended Q&A where you can ask me questions about what you're about to hear and everything that you've heard, and maybe you have a career development question. I'll see how I can help you. Okay, so Bob Keegan, he is the guy behind the technical problem adaptive challenge model, and he also came up with the adult development theory. And the theory is very interesting because up until about 40 years ago, the thinking was that, our cognitive abilities develop up until we're 20 or so, and then we kind of plateau as far as our mental complexity, because the thinking was that, sure, we learn from experiences and hopefully we don't make the same mistakes again. But as far as like truly developing greater perspective, taking abilities and the capacity for more complex understanding of ourselves and the world, that stops. Whereas when you observe children, you can see how maybe like first graders cannot do advanced math that requires like spatial thinking. But as they progress and grow, all of a sudden they can grasp all these more abstract math concepts. Just an example. So there are actually 5 stages of development. This slide represents 3 that are prevalent in adults, because what Bob Keegan discovered through his research is that no, we don't stop developing mental complexity at 20. We don't all keep progressing, but we all have the potential to keep progressing. And we'll talk about the kinds of things that help realize that potential. So the 3 stages prevalent in adulthood are the socialized mind. And the socialized mind makes up a good portion of the population, more than half. And in a socialized mind state, the people look to those outside of them to understand who they are and what they should do and how they should conduct themselves. So socialized persons seek some kind of external authority, be it religious or governmental or perhaps within their family, to really tell them who they are and how to be. And socialized people are very dependent on others for acceptance and approval and validation. This is not something they have within them yet, and so they need to seek them externally. And the thing is that up until very recently in history, being socialized was perfectly sufficient. It was perfectly sufficient to being a parent, to being a spouse, to being a friend, to being a good member of the community, of the society, to be a leader, to be certainly a manager. And the socialized mind was like a triumph in development once upon a time. But We are always growing as individuals and as society. And so now we've got like a sizable population of people that operate at self-authoring mind. And at self-authoring stage, they no longer depend on others for that acceptance and validation and approval and direction, for how to be and what to do and what should my identity be. And they have this, all of this already within them as this internal compass, and they've got these values which are different from values of socialized mind person, even though the values may be the same, but they arrive at them differently. So for example, a certain value of someone who is socialized, they may have that value because they inherited it from their family, from someone else who had influence over them growing up. They never really re-examined it. But a self-authoring mind person, whatever values they have, it's the values that they have really truly thought about and like kicked around and worked out for themselves. And so they're going to be much kind of more grounded in their own understanding of who they are and what the role in the world is and how to conduct themselves. And they're not going to have, they're not going to look externally as much for the things that the socialized mind does. Being self-authoring doesn't solve all problems and all dilemmas, just the ones that the socialized mind is grappling with. And the other thing I want to say is that even though here we have like socialized mind stage and then self-authoring stage and then self-transforming, which I'm about to talk about, in reality, there are like sub-stages between each of the stages. So there are like 4 sub-stages between socialized mind and self-authoring mind, because we don't just wake up one day and go from one to another. It's a long journey. It is a long journey. It takes years, if not decades. Like going from socialized to self-authoring, for those who do make the trip, takes that long. I would place myself like midway between socialized and self-authoring. And oh man, like it's a painful climb. That's all I have to say. Is it worth it? Sometimes. I hope at the end it will be worth it. But leaving the socialized mind behind, it's not easy at all. There are losses associated with that. And so it's taking a long time. And the last one, self-transforming mind, that's the one that we don't encounter very frequently. Whereas like self-authoring mind, people who reach it, they reach it usually not before midlife. And self-transforming mind, not even until later years in their life. And it is very rare because it expands beyond self-authoring, so it can hold paradoxes better. And the self-transforming mind is very curious about the differences. Whereas socialized mind and self-authoring mind, to some extent, they want to kind of assert maybe their rightness or righteousness over someone who is different, thinks in different ways. The self-transforming mind is going to be fascinated by the difference. I'm just fascinated. Also, self-transforming mind, they see bigger pictures. So like as a business person, a self-transforming person is not going to think in terms of competition. They're going to think more in terms of how can most people benefit. So if a self-transforming business person goes into a new region to set up their business, they are going to also help other businesses in the area. And if somebody asks them, like, are you crazy? Like, why are you helping your competition? They're going to be like, well, if we all do well, then the region as a whole is going to do well economically, which is going to draw in more resources, more potential clients for everyone's business. So that's how they think, as opposed to I've got to kill off competition. Why am I talking about all this in the context of organizational environment? It's because a study was done, and I mentioned before that the socialized mind used to be quite fit for performing managerial duties because they knew right from wrong and they could explain what had to be done, like take direction from somebody above them and push it down to those below them. But that's no longer the case. Somebody who is purely socialized, not like making their way beyond socialized towards self-transforming, is going to be pretty lost in their role because things are changing rapidly and things are more complex. And there are different problems to solve and more problems with the adaptive component to them. And so what the research study found is that those that have self-authoring mind are much better suited for the tasks of management and leadership. And not only that, but those rare self-transforming people, they do even better as CEOs and other top-level leaders. The thing is that they're not always well accepted by organizations because they think so differently that they're like rejected by the masses. And so why is it important to develop your mental complexity? Because it's going to make it easier to perform certain functions at work and to navigate the storms that inevitably arise at work. And what is painful and impossible to the socialized mind is actually quite doable and maybe even appropriately challenging in a fun kind of way, self-authoring mind. And I conduct a session here on O'Reilly. It's called Unlock Your Potential. I'm doing it later this month. And that session gets right at the core of how to support the development of our mental complexity. And what else do I want to say that's pertinent? I really would like to pause here and see what your questions are or reflections and comments are, because I've been talking a lot. There were a lot of juicy concepts, and I want to be useful here. So I would like to invite your thoughts and questions, please. If I don't hear from you, I'm going to be talking about things that are interesting to me, which may or may not be what's interesting to you. So this is your chance to direct me. Okay. So I'm going to send a pulse check out. And please give me thumbs up if you're like, yeah, I'm with you. It's all good. Can't think of a question, but if you just want to keep talking about this mental complexity thing, I'll sit and listen. Or give me more examples about technical problem versus adaptive challenge. So basically, you're giving me permission to talk about whatever I want. And thumbs down. I'm lost. I don't even understand enough to formulate a question. I'm out of here in 5 minutes. Thumbs down. Okay, so far only thumbs up. That's encouraging. And 1 thumbs down. So if you're thumbs down, I invite you to pop into my Q&A and say more about why you're thumbs down, and maybe I'll be able to help you. And thank you for everyone who responded. So just so you have a complete picture, I am going to say a few more things about the mental complexity piece. I'm going to end the pulse check. Thank you to everyone who responded. And thank you to the thumbs down for being honest. So these are stages 3, 4, and 5. And there are 2 stages that precede the socialized mind. And one of those is like infant and young child. And at that stage of development, there's really not much mental complexity to talk about. And okay, I see your question. And after I finish talking about the initial 2 stages, I'll come back to you. And the infant or young child, they really experience themselves as one with the environment, meaning, my body, like the comfort, the warmth, the food, the caregiver, the light or the dark, whatever, it's all like part of one experience. It's all fused into one. And then, as the child grows, they start developing mental complexity enough to differentiate themselves from being at one with their caregiver, for example, to being quite separate from their caregiver. Any of you ever meet a toddler? Well, they're asserting that separateness every chance they get. Of course, they're not totally separate, and what they do is they separate and then they come back. They want to make sure that the home base is still there. And then they separate and they come back. But yeah, and the guiding question for stage 2, for those children that are asserting the separateness, it's actually quite an egoic stage and appropriately selfish stage. It is all about them. It is all about them, and the guiding question is, what's in it for me? Like, you're asking me to do this, well, what's in it for me? And those children that are developing empathy, they don't have full empathy yet. And so the relationships, and I'm talking in general terms, like there are exceptions. And so the relationships tend to be transactional. And, but again, totally developmentally appropriate. What's not appropriate is when a child grows up into an adult and the guiding question in life remains, what's in it for me? And they don't consider others and others' needs and preferences, and they still conduct themselves in relationships in a very transactional way. And Bob Keegan used to joke that there are plenty of those kinds of people at Harvard Business School. And you might know examples in your own life. And then, like, the transition from the second, or the sovereign, self-sovereign mind, to the socialized mind is huge. It is huge. I'm a mother myself, and I remember, like, having to keep on top of my oldest son for